Back to Law and Crime, everybody. Michael Bryant here. I've been gone for a week or so apologies to producer Ann. Going to have to retrain me today. And let me mention before we jump into what we've got, CrimeCon last weekend, an amazing experience, 6,000 intense people, shall I say. But a great time had by all, and we may chat about that a little bit because one of my guests happened to have been there as well. But anyway, let's get into some business here, all right? I'm going to be here for the next couple of hours, and we're going to go to Massachusetts now for the high-profile trial. They're not in court today, but the Karen Reed matter is always on people's minds. If you aren't familiar with this case, let me catch you up. This was January 29th, 2022, when the defendant allegedly hit her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, with her SUV. After a night out of drinking with friends, they were at the nearby Waterfall Bar and Grill. Now remember, the victim was also a Boston police officer. There's an after party taking place at 34 Fairview Road. That's the home where O'Keefe was found dead outside in a snowbank. Now retired Boston officer Brian Albert owned this house alongside his wife, Nicole Albert. Now the defense alleges that Karen Reed is being framed in a massive police cover-up. Her defense team says that Albert and two other people had, quote, a motive, the opportunity, and means to attack John O'Keefe. Now, in this case, nearly everyone knows everyone to some extent. This is a good little snapshot here for you. The defense suggesting Albert's nephew, Colin, was in a physical altercation with the victim in the basement due to being he's got some bruised knuckles. I call him Knuckles now. Anyway, the Brian Albert sister-in-law, Jennifer McCabe, she searched how long to die in the cold. It was misspelled, yes, H-O-S. Allegedly, she also searched this at approximately about 2:27 a.m. She says, no, that did not happen. Brian Albert is friends with ATF agent Brian Higgins, who had a flirty text message or two with the defendant. Allegedly, Higgins also drove to the crime scene the morning of the 29th to speak to Brian Albert before law enforcement arrived. So, again, court not in session today gives us a great chance to kind of catch our breath on this one and catch up. Yesterday, Sergeant Yuri Buchanan was on the stand. This witness testified to the infamous and magical broken taillight, the pieces, and the clothing that was found at the scene. This witness was not present when the evidence was being bagged on February 4th, 6 days after the incident. So let's listen to what he had to say under cross-examination by Alan Jackson regarding the evidence collected by Trooper Michael Proctor.
My question to you, if you know, sir, and you may not know, is what was happening to these items between January 29th, after you lost sight of them that night on the butcher paper, and February 4th, when that tag indicates that they were first processed?
To the best of my knowledge, those items were drying on the butcher paper.
For 6 days?
If that's what the label maker says, yes, for 6 days. They were soaking wet.
And those would have been certainly accessible to and in the possession of the lead case officer in the case, was Trooper Proctor, right?
Yes, if Trooper Proctor needed to review those items, he would have access to those items. Absolutely.
And you're also aware that the first actual log of any chain of custody for those items is March 14th, when they were finally submitted 6 weeks later to the crime lab.
That is not true. The first actual log of those items is when we collected them from the hospital.
Where's the log? I'm talking about the physical log, like sign in, sign out log. Where's the log?
It's documented in the reports saying that we collected them.
Where's the log of these items before March 14th?
It's documented in the report.
There is no log, is there, Sergeant?
I do not know.
Okay, that log is suspicious. Now, remember, there was one search done on February 4th and another on February 10th. Sergeant Buchanan says that Chief Berkowitz was already at the crime scene. Watch.
Chief Berkowitz certainly was there.
Yes.
And Chief Berkowitz indicated that as he was driving by, he saw a piece of plastic.
Yes.
And stopped his car and then started making phone calls.
I believe that's what he indicated to the caller, yes.
Did you question Chief Berkowitz about why he was driving by the location in the first place?
Absolutely not.
Okay. You knew at that point that the Canton Police Department had been recused because of at least an appearance or potential for a conflict of interest, correct?
I knew they recused themselves due to only in respect to interviews. They didn't want to conduct interviews with us side by side.
I mean, if there's a conflict of interest, Sergeant, for a department, conducting the interviews is just one aspect of an investigation, correct?
I'm not going to speak like a conflict of interest, but yes, conducting an interview is just one aspect of the investigation, yes.
So is it your testimony that your understanding was they couldn't conduct interviews, but they could collect evidence, store evidence, write search warrants, get returns on search warrants, execute search warrants, conduct searches? They could do all that but not conduct interviews?
My understanding was they were recusing themselves from conducting interviews. They still allowed us to use their facilities. We utilized their conference room to conduct interviews. There was evidence being stored at their Sally Port, being the vehicle. So that was my understanding.
Isn't it true that the entirety of the Canton Police Department had recused itself because of a familiarity between one of their members, Kevin Albert, and the Albert family on whose lawn John O'Keefe was found? That was the conflict, correct?
I knew that was the connection between them, yes.
And you understood, sir, that that agency was to have nothing from an investigative standpoint, nothing to do with this investigation, correct?
They were not conducting the investigation, no.
Matter of fact, Trooper Proctor and you supervising him, y'all were conducting the investigation, right?
Our office was conducting the investigation.
So did you find it unusual or suspicious in any way that the chief of police for the conflicted Canton PD was the person driving by 34 Fairview looking for evidence?
Objection.
Can you answer that question, Sergeant?
He would have to repeat it. There's just so much I can't.
It was a little wordy. I'll try it again. Did you find that suspicious?
Which part? You have to repeat the whole thing.
That Chief Berkowitz from the conflicted Canton PD was at 34 Fairview looking for evidence?
The way you posed the question, I did not find it suspicious at all. He's the chief of the police in the town where he works, and he's driving down the street. I mean, that's not suspicious.
You certainly knew, as a supervisor over the case officer, that any involvement by Canton Police Department, given the fact that there's a potential conflict, any involvement by them could compromise your otherwise clean investigation. You knew that, right?
Not necessarily, no.
Did Chief Berkowitz disclose to you that morning on February 4th that he had been communicating with Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, two witnesses, on your case that morning?
Objection.
Sustained.
If you knew information about communication between and among Canton PD and your witnesses, you would find that inappropriate, would you not?
Objection.
Sustained.
I'll tell you, Alan Jackson, he is one heck of a, oh, hold on, what is that? Defense attorney. Oh, what I found, they're all over the place, these things. Hey, that cross-examination, critical to this case because it has so much to do with the evidence and the timing and the investigation. So speaking of investigation, I've done a little research myself. Strapped this to my body, ran 24 miles an hour into a wall to see if it would break, to simulate some of the evidence in this case. This is a taillight module from a 570. It's a couple of years earlier. I will give you that. The newer models have a white lens up on the corner for the rear backup lights, but basically the same material, the same chunks that would have come from a taillight if hitting something, whether it be John O'Keefe's car, a person. The real question I had was not just how ridiculous that sounds. I finally broke this with a hammer because that's kind of the kind of pressure it would take to do that. But why was finding all these pieces? You know, day after day, more pieces are showing up there in front of 34 Fairview. I got to get some help on this. Luckily, Bob Mata is here. He's a criminal defense attorney and host of the Defense Diaries, and Katherine Lizardo, trial attorney. Good to have both you guys along. So, Bob, you know, I feel like I'm seeing you more than I am my wife after CrimeCon, but it was good to see you down there in the flesh. Katherine, next time you got to go. So, give me your take on this magic taillight. That it's the gift that just keeps on giving.
It's one of the great mysteries of the world. As we were watching the sergeant's testimony yesterday on cross, especially when they got to the Sally Port video, it became really evident in terms of the Commonwealth putting a video into evidence that was inverted. Just blew my mind. You know, you don't want to go to this place that the cops are planting this evidence, but the longer this case goes on and the more that gets introduced, you can't help but think that that's what happened.
You know, it's almost too much. It's almost, there's no way this would happen. And remember, Canton Police Officer Stephen Saraf, he testified earlier in this trial, and he said he didn't find any pieces of broken taillight the morning of January 29th, which is kind of an important date. And this witness we've just heard from is going to continue on more cross, which would make him squirm even further. So, Katherine, I don't know if you need to know much more about this lovely taillight other than what the video shows you, when it appears to be intact, primarily intact, after the time in which the prosecution suggests the defendant hit the deceased. I mean, do we need to, I mean, the minutiae is interesting, but do we need to really get into it that deeply? It seems like common sense to me.
I don't think so. And you're right. It seems like common sense, and the jury is allowed to use their common sense as they deliberate. And here we see how the taillight, like you just really exemplify there, that how difficult it is to actually break the taillight, and how the taillight glass is located and discovered day after day. I mean, the state can argue that maybe because of the weather and because of the snow that was melting, that the more they uncover the taillight, but they have to create that link, because right now there's reasonable doubt regarding that taillight, and if it is hers, how did it get there?
Yeah, and Bob, you make a good point about that video, which we are going to see here in just a moment, and it's important to kind of set the table for that, Bob. It wasn't the prosecution, whose witness was talking about that video, that admitted, oh, by the way, this is mirror image. How do you, I mean, is that something that the recorder would have recorded? I don't think so. I think that would have to have been manipulated, and the defense had to bring it up.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. And when you look at comparison, when you're looking at the cross and the direct, Lally directed him as if it wasn't inverted. You know, he was trying to give the impression to the jury that was the driver's side or the passenger side of the vehicle that we were looking at when it's pulled in. I was able to pick it up from the writing on the back of the classic Canton Cruiser there. Well, I saw immediately that it was inverted. You could see it there. It's backwards, where the word police is backwards. So you knew right away, which means that the taillight in question is now in that back corner. And the testimony blew my mind, man, yesterday. It really did. It's like, I'm very objective on this case. I'm not in a camp either way. I'm an attorney. I wait until all the evidence comes in, and then I reach a conclusion. But the more that we're seeing here, the more it seems like something nefarious went down.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all look at this going in, okay, let's look at the evidence and see what happens. But Katherine, you see something like this, and I've only seen that kind of shot on a cooking show, where they shoot the mirror of what's happening. Well, this is like, did they shoot a mirror or what? But what's the impact on the jury when they think about the cops in this case, Katherine?
Well, then that raises the reasonable doubt I was mentioning earlier as to Karen Reed. And it supports the defense's theory that maybe there is a cover-up. As he said, that looking at that video, it's so obvious. You don't even have to be an expert to know that that's an inverted video, because the wording is blatantly right there. You can see it. So the question is, why was it inverted? So the state has to answer that question when they do the redirect of the sergeant. And also, why does it need to be inverted, and who inverted that? Was that just a technical error that they don't know how to record a video mirrored or not mirrored? Is this their standard procedure? The state should have addressed that at the very beginning, if this is the way they record their videos, which is very weird, and that's a legal term. So they have to address that in redirect to head on.
And the problem is that, at a certain point, you're like, how many weird coincidences and mistakes could there be that are innocent? So we're going to hear more about the inverted video, and we'll get back into this case. I think we need to take a break, though. Let's do that. We'll come right back to Law and Crime.